Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Tom Tobin, president of the club, and we're thrilled to have you join us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel. Our club meets weekly at Laurel Lake for breakfast on Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30. Come out and join us for a meeting. We would love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact we're having on our local community and the world, visit our website, rotaryhudson.org. Enjoy the meeting today and help us share the message that Rotary connects the world.
Welcome everybody to our flying club this morning. I believe this morning the prayer is going to be done by Mr. Phil Herman from the Hudson School System.
Good morning. Let us pray. Dear God, thank you for this food before us this morning, and thank you for our hosts here at Laurel Lake who have prepared it. Thank you for the fellowship we have as we sit around the food and are able to gather together this morning. God, winter in Northeast Ohio has not been that cold, but it's been really gray. It's been wet. It's been rainy, and it leaves us longing for the warmth, the light, and the hope offered by spring. While we wait for spring, help us practice patience, and more importantly, help us as Rotarians be the warmth, the light, and hope for our families, for our friends, for those in our community, and those in our work who need us to be spring for them. For this, we ask your blessing. Amen.
Thank you, Phil. And you know, as it says in the Bible, it's through suffering in Northeast Ohio that good things will come about. And then our newest member of our flying club, Jane, will come up and do the Pledge of Allegiance and the four-way test.
Yep. Oh, let me get a microphone.
You can do it from the side.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And then the four-way test you can just say from here.
Thank you. The four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First.
Is it the truth?
Second.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. You can knock those two off your list. Yeah, you're one-fourth the way there. All right, so I believe that Liz is going to do the singing for us this morning. Thank you, Liz, for volunteering.
Special guest appearance.
Yes, okay. Let's sing God Bless America.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you, Liz. And now, our esteemed president, Mr. Tom Tobin, will take over the club and announce any guests today.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right. Phil, with the blessing, talking about the weather and climate and everything like that, I just got to point out, for Abby's benefit and the many Hudson High School or Hudson students out there, I'm sorry that Phil has not had the opportunity to utter the two words that mean the most to every Hudson School student, and those are snow day. Right? None this year, right? Yeah, Phil's popularity, he's going to have to 1 to 3 inches tonight. Phil's be watching. Yeah, I don't think that's going to do it, Phil. Sorry, Abby. And thank you very much, Liz, for for leading us in song this morning. You scared the hell out of me with that first note. It was like way up there. I was like, how am I going to do this? All right. Hey, I'd like to acknowledge a few guests this morning. We have the illustrious Jake Jackson, president of the Clock Tower Group, with us this morning. Jake, thanks for being with us, joining us. And we also have another Rotarian. I believe she's a relatively new Rotarian from the Stowe Monroe Falls Club. Jennifer Coleman is with us this morning. Jennifer, thanks for being with us. Okay. By the way, so I don't forget, I really want to thank Abby Silcox for helping us with the audiovisual work. This will be your final, I think, time with us this month. Thank you so much. It's been a big help, and we appreciate it. Okay. Hey, I got a freebie giveaway here for courtesy of Marilyn. I have 2 tickets to the, what is this? To the Western Reserve music from the Western Reserve. Ben, this is an organization you're very familiar with, right? I mean, you're a big fan of this organization too. I got 2 tickets. I think they're featuring Jack Sutty, trumpet player, and Christine Fuoco on piano. This is on March 1st, which is, what is that? This Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. I have 2 tickets. Come and see me if you'd like to take these tickets. All right. Not too much else to report this morning. So I am going to ask John Adams to introduce our featured speaker today. John, if you'll step up.
Good morning, Rotarians. It is my pleasure to introduce my friend Heidi Gartland for our presentation this morning. So we talked about health and wellness as our theme. Remember, we started off with the idea of what we're going to eat and the importance of that in our body and what we eat and when we eat it. And then we had a presentation from Western Reserve Hospital around really the healthcare scene in Northeast Ohio. And I thought it would be neat to conclude our speakers with healthcare on the national perspective and the impact that has in our region. And getting Heidi Gartland, who is not only a very close personal friend, but also a lobbyist and spends her time in Columbus and Washington lobbying for the healthcare environment, particularly university hospitals, would be a good way to wrap up our month. Heidi literally is wheels down on the ground about 11:30 last night after a meeting with the Federal Reserve. No, she's not affecting currency policy right now, but so Heidi is a very busy woman, and we're fortunate to have her. I could literally fill her whole time by reading her bio, and so I'm just going to abbreviate it a bit. So Heidi is a healthcare executive and community leader and lobbyist at University Hospitals in Cleveland, a $4 billion healthcare system with 18 hospitals and more than 28,000 physicians and employees. She leads the UH's external relations and strategy, including community relations, community benefit, corporate reinvestment, strategic economic development projects, government and regulatory affairs, and diversity and inclusion commitments. She advocates for UH at the federal, state, and local level, and is an experienced leader in healthcare public policy. Heidi was recognized as a healthcare hero by Crain's Cleveland Business, was a finalist for the Athena International Leadership Award, and Inside Business magazine profiled her advocacy leadership. Heidi completed her undergraduate degree at the College of Worcester. She earned her Master's of Health Administration at The Ohio State University and a certificate in diversity management from Georgetown University. Heidi is also an adjunct faculty member at teaching health policy and law in the MBA program at Baldwin Wallace. She is a regular speaker nationally and in Ohio on emerging health policy issues. Prior to working at university hospitals, Heidi worked at Ohio Hospital Association, the Illinois Hospital Association, Rush Medical Center, the Ohio State University, and Akron Children's Hospital. Heidi and her husband Dan live in Hudson, and they have 2 daughters who also went through the Hudson school system. So it's my extreme pleasure to introduce my friend Heidi Gartland.
He's a little taller than me, so hopefully this works. It's great to be home. I never get to work from like Hudson. I'm always flying somewhere, driving somewhere. I also want to acknowledge Bill Benoit, who's in our back, he's here with you today. I know he's one of your members, but he leads one of our best organizations, the UH Portage Medical Center, and I've watched his career. He's been at Parma and a number of other places, so it's great to see you here as well. And John, thank you for inviting me. We've been residents for 24 years in Hudson. And, my husband and I have been married 30. I have 2 children that went through the school. I met you, Phil, a long time ago. I was like a Girl Scout leader, and I don't know, we were advocating on something, and you were the head of student services, and I don't even remember what I came in now to see where you are in your career, and I see a lot of familiar faces. But it has really been a privilege and an honor for me to work for the last 25 years at university hospitals. My dad, I know, was really upset with me when I left the Ohio Hospital Association after 6 years, and he says, "What are you doing? He worked at Westfield Insurance Company for, I think, 40 years or something, and he says, you're never going to amount," no, he didn't say, "You're never going to amount to anything if you don't stay in one place," but, you just like your dad telling you. So he'd be really proud that, I stayed at one place. And UH, when I started 25 years ago, was 2 hospitals. It was Bedford Medical Center and everything down at Cleveland Medical Center, Rainbow. We didn't have Seidman, we had Ireland Cancer Center. And it was 2 hospitals, and I was their VP of Government Relations at age 30, so now you know how old I am. And I want to just tell you that we're now 18 hospitals. We cover the top half of Ohio. We're the 5th largest private employer in the state of Ohio. And that doesn't matter, but what matters to me about UH is that we care for the community in a way that I think is very authentic and very respectful, and that's a piece of my job. I don't get a chance to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about the government relations piece of it, but I'm just really proud to work there, and it has been a place that's healed me with cancer, healed my family. I don't care whether you're a fan of UH or where you go, but, we are just blessed in Northeast Ohio with amazing health care. I don't think maybe you appreciate it. I certainly appreciate it going to other places, but we just have amazing health care resources here. And the other honor that I get is that I get to advocate. So when I go to a party, and John probably knows this, people say, well, what do you do? And it sort of depends on what mood I'm in. And I'll say, well, I'm a child advocate. And they're like, oh, that is so awesome. You help children. You advocate on their needs and their welfare. Or I might say, I'm a lobbyist. And they're like, oh, you're a lobbyist, huh? Do you give piles of money to people? Or are you one of those bottom feeders, that Trump talks about, clearing the swamp? And I'm sure you all have opinions. When you heard I was a lobbyist today, you might have had some of those opinions. I should have sent you the bio that said I was an advocate. You might have had a different view of me. But what I hope to spend just, some time with you today is to give you a window into what we do to advocate on healthcare. I'm not going to give you UH's positions. I'll give you a couple examples if you want them of things I've worked on to make it real for you, like what I do. Because it's nebulous. How many of you have lobbied? How many of you have done that? Awesome. You've all lobbied. You've lobbied your spouse, you've lobbied your employer, but, government lobbying, does have rules and regulations. You could go to jail for it. There are things that I have to follow, and I'm not going to get into that today. But, and I do teach a class at Baldwin Wallace, and one of the things that I want to talk about is healthcare being 20% of our economy. You are all touched by it in some way. You either know somebody that works for healthcare, you personally experience. There's nobody that hasn't experienced it in some way in your life. And yet, it's always the controversy, right? I was flying back yesterday, so thankfully I didn't watch the debate last night. I watched the last one. But, I'm sure healthcare came up. Did anybody watch it? Did healthcare come up? Did Bernie talk about Medicare for all? And everybody else was like, how are you going to pay for it? Right? So we're the tale of sort of 2, cities or countries or whatever. We are these diametrically opposed ideas about what we should do for healthcare, and you all have your own opinions, and I'm not here to change anybody's. I advocate for university hospitals and what the needs of our patients are. I also have my own personal views, and you're going to get both of those today. I'll make sure I separate them so that you know what is UH's and what is my own personal. Happy to answer questions on either side of that. And often people are like, do you lobby on things you don't believe in? You know, and things like that. And, you know, there are things that I know I advocate for UH that I might not personally exactly, think is what I need to do, but I also know that the best interests of the patients we care for is at the bottom of what we're advocating for at University Hospital. So I'll just put that out there on the table. And one of the things that I think about in healthcare in the United States and how we became a country is, we were founded by these folks that came over the ocean and said, we are not going to have government control our lives. And so our healthcare system reflects the fact that government, for the most part, comes in when something is failing in the economy, some sort of policy regulation. And then you've got others that believe that healthcare should be there for everybody, that healthcare should be a basic right. Again, I have my own personal opinions, but so we have these diametrical fights that we have in this country. And the way I talk about it is that when the market fails, we create policies that take care of folks. And then we put our values on top of that. And so I advocate for two major programs that fund health care that the government pays for, Medicare and Medicaid. Anybody know the difference between the two of them? How many of you are on Medicare? Some of you might know what that is, right? So it's people over 65, right? Does anybody other than people over 65 ever get on Medicare? Yeah, disabled people, anybody that has Lou Gehrig's disease gets on the minute that they get the diagnosis. If you have end-stage renal disease, you're born as an infant, you have end-stage renal disease, guess what? You're on Medicare. Never paid in a single. So there was a market failure. People decided that not just people over 65 were going to get on Medicare, but that the country had certain obligations to take care of certain people that had certain things. And so, believe it or not, Medicare takes care of folks that may have never paid a quarter into Social Security or any other sort of Medicare tax to do that, because we believe that people have needs and they deserve things. And so our government makes decisions about those sorts of things. Medicaid, on the other hand, anybody know what that is? You can tell I teach a class, right? I always do this. I'm sorry. What's Medicaid?
It's basically free health care for those below a certain level.
Correct.
More or less the poverty.
Right. So Medicaid is a program that you have to qualify for. You don't just, Medicare is a benefit. The minute I turn 65 or I have a condition of end-stage renal disease or Lou Gehrig's disease or I'm disabled for more than 24 months, I automatically get it because I paid in. Except for these kids that get on an end-stage renal disease, that it's a benefit, right? I did something, I worked hard, and I got something at the end of that. Medicaid, on the other hand, is a failure from an economic perspective, and it is a program that takes care of people that don't have means. So it's an eligibility program. These are when government comes in and they decide which are the deserving poor. Some are deserving poor and some are not deserving poor. So it's a judgment. It's not everybody, it's not universal. It is certain people under a certain percentage of poverty or a certain amount of disability. And so when I lobby, when I advocate, there are two kinds of major policies that we advocate on, and I hope that when you think about the debates we have in the country, you think about these two things, because they're sort of like they're not the only things, but they're sort of the basis on how we advocate. One is what we call allocative policy, and the other is redistribution policy, right? So tax policy is redistribution policy. I tax you, and you pay money, and I give it to somebody else, right? That's redistribution. Those are the biggest food fights in government. So when you hear about lots of controversy, it's when I'm taking something of yours and giving it to somebody else, and I may never have the opportunity to take that money and use it for me or my family. So that's Medicaid, right? So Medicaid is, many of you in this room, maybe you'll be on Medicaid at some point, maybe you know somebody, but for the most part, folks in Hudson are not on Medicaid. There's no judgment whether you are or not. It's just a matter of income. But those are the most controversial things that we talk about. When Trump was first elected, one of the big things that the Republican House and the Republican Senate and our Republican president were trying to do was to change how Medicaid was funded across this country. It was a huge food fight. You may have remembered John McCain came in to the Senate floor before he passed away and put his thumb down. That was on Medicaid. That was on a major redistribution of policy and dollars. And I spend a lot of my time in that controversial place because Medicaid is a really, really, really important program for people that need it. And, you know, I worked in Chicago. You heard I worked at Rush, and I worked at the Illinois Hospital Association, and I got there right after graduate school. And, you know, this was the time back in the 80s where they were talking about these moms coming in their fur coats to come and get Medicaid. And, you know, there's a lot of judgment, right, that goes on with that. Well, who knows if they got that fur coat at, you know, the Goodwill or wherever. But we have a lot of judgment when it comes to when they take our money and they give it to somebody else and who's the deserving person. Now, Medicare or NIH, how many of you know what NIH is? National Institutes of Health. $36 billion. The country makes very easy decision. They take your tax dollars every year and put it in a bank account for $36 billion and sprinkle it all out. Northeast Ohio is hugely beneficial. One of the reasons I love working at university hospitals is not only are we a great teaching hospital and a great patient care hospital, but we do amazing amounts of research. I'm in the elevators all the time. I have two offices. I work either at our Management Services Center, which is really boring. It's in Shaker Heights, and it's like, you know, an office building, and you don't feel like you're in medical. Or I go down to Cleveland Medical Center where my staff is, and I go in the elevators and I get to hear these doctors talking about, you know, what they're doing in research and learn all about that. So NIH, you know, I bet you guys have never lobbied against NIH. I bet maybe some of you have lobbied for it, like you care about Alzheimer's or you care about, you know, heart disease or cancer, and you have advocated to get funding for that. I bet you didn't even think about, well, I bet you thought about it, but I bet you didn't think about how easy or how much easier it is for our government officials to make decisions to allocate money, that $36 billion that they allocate every year for NIH. They put it in their bills, and it is not that controversial. It's much more collegial. It's much more bipartisan. And that policy is something that I also get to advocate on. And because it's redistribute, or it's allocative, meaning that I have just as much opportunity to get access to those dollars as somebody else. I've had cancer, you know, I have family members that have had heart disease, and I know that when they're putting money in there, I might benefit from that. And so health policy advocacy and lobbying is very much along those two lines. I sort of think to myself, okay, am I stealing somebody's money and putting it over in another pot that folks may never see? I know that's going to be a slog. It's going to be a fight. I know that that's going to be those hard things that we sign up for. And that's Medicare for All. That's, you know, that's that controversy about, do I take, you know, everybody's money and pool it, and, you know, and who knows how much it might cost and how much taxes, again, you know, who's going to pay for that. So the advocacy that we work on for university hospitals really deals with those issues, and it's very much the same level at the state level. I will say the biggest difference in advocating at the federal versus the state level is we have this thing called a deficit at the federal level, right? So I can go to Washington and say, I need tax reform, or I need more Medicare dollars, or I need more Medicaid dollars, or I need more money for NIH. And guess what? They can make those decisions, and at the end of the day, they don't have to balance their federal budget. They have this huge interest, you know, we all talk about it. At the state level, it's very different. And at the state level, because of federalism, because of the fact that our founders said that, you know, the Constitution sets up the way that we run our government, that whatever isn't the right of the states, that's left over for the federal government. So who has the power, really, as it relates to Constitution, is the states. So the states do things like, anybody here a physician or a nurse or anybody that's licensed by, what are you? Physical therapist. So are you regulated by the federal level on your licensure? No, state. So nobody really thinks about that. We have very solid state lines. And Bill, what is your occupational therapy? Are you federally licensed to be an occupational therapist? If you move to another state, do you have to get a different license? So we don't think about that. But at the state level, that's really where you think about it. The federal government, think about right now what's happening with coronavirus. We had this controversy. There's huge controversies between who gets to actually quarantine them. Does the federal government get that business, or does the state government? We had that with SARS and a number of other things. If you remember, there's these shared powers in the middle, and that's when it gets really messy, right, between the federal government and the state government. And I get in the middle of many of those conversations. So at the state level, we advocate for things like licensure and scope of practice, like what can physical therapists and occupational therapists do? With healthcare delivery reform and so much change going on, there's a lot of food fights, so to speak, between who gets to do what. Do nurses get to have prescriptive authority? There's something called a CRNA, a Certified Registered Nurse Anesthetist. I said that right. And you know, the anesthesiologists, who are doctors that go to school for 4 years and then go to residency, you know, they don't like it when the CRNAs try to take their job, right? So we get into food fights that are a little bit different at the state level. And then Medicaid is regulated. It's that shared power between the federal government and the state government, so we work on that. I wanted to give you 2 examples, and then how much more time do I have? Okay, 20 minutes. All right. So I thought I would give you some examples of things that are going on right now. How many of you have ever heard of something called a surprise bill? They're all surprises, right?
Sarah brings those home once in a while.
Yeah. I'm talking about healthcare, not what Sarah and I do when we go shopping. Surprise bill? Yeah. So what do you think that is? Right. 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 And that's what lobbyists do. Sure. So surprise bill, and I'm going to give you another definition of surprise bill, but what lobbyists do, you know, so when I'm not an advocate, I'm the lobbyist, right? I go in the middle of the night because a lobbyist literally is somebody who's a content expert on an issue. So let's say it's a healthcare issue, but I'm also a content expert on the process. Like, how does a bill become a law? We've all seen, you know, I'm just a bill, right, on Schoolhouse Rock. Yeah. That's not how it happens. And so to your very good point, a surprise bill is like, or a surprise amendment is when somebody like me who knows how the process works gets in there and gets my little fix. You know, I've just stolen something from somebody else. It's either, let's say it's a scope of practice bill, right? I like the CRNAs better than I like the anesthesiologists. I might in the middle of the night come in and steal some of their power by taking whatever they get to do and taking it for myself. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about economics. Many of you are business people that, you know, their life is based on business. Healthcare is a business, and that's sort of the bad rap healthcare gets as well. So surprise bill is that. There's another kind of surprise bill that's going through right now, the legislature, and that is when I go to a hospital. Let's say I go to an emergency department, and, you know, looked on my insurance. You know, I had the wits about me in the ambulance to look at the list of providers, and that hospital was exactly right. That was my provider. But I didn't realize that when I got there, the emergency department physician that took care of me wasn't part of that network. And so, lo and behold, insurance pays for that emergency department visit, and I get this bill for like thousands of dollars from Dr. X, Y, and Z, who's maybe saved my life, but Dr. X, Y, and Z didn't sign up with that insurance company. And so I get this thing called a surprise bill. And my insurance company said, hey, we don't know this doctor, and we're not contracted with them, and guess what? We're not obligated to pay for that. So right now in Washington and Columbus, we're working on bills, pieces of legislation, not dollar bills, but pieces of legislation that are trying to mitigate and put patients outside the middle of that controversy. Now, I will say that piece, while hospitals, insurance, and companies are fighting, this is something that whether you're a Republican or Democrat, everybody wants to fix it. So I call that allocative policy, where people are motivated because constituents like you or you end up with a bill, and you know what? They don't want to hear from another constituent that, that they have to solve this problem for. And it's a big deal. If any of you have ever ridden in a helicopter to a hospital, that's the worst because these are venture capital, and there's nothing wrong with making money in healthcare, but when patients get impacted in the middle of that, they end up, most of them, not having contracts with any of the insurance companies, and that's actually their business model. Their business model is to not have contracts so that they can charge you $10,000 for that air flight. So anyway, those are pieces of legislation that we're working on right now. Another couple of things that I think about when we do advocacy, and then I'll give you some ideas, and they're sort of the 4 Ps that I think about when we do advocacy, and that is the policy, like what am I trying to change? So if I'm trying to change surprise billing, that's the policy. How do I actually get in there, change that legislation to make it better for whomever I'm trying to fix it for? What are the politics? Okay, Medicare for all, lots of politics around that. You're a Democrat or a Republican or a socialist or a Republican or whatever, you have opinions about that particular piece of legislation. Hyper, issue. What's that? Did somebody say? What's that? Yes, ventilating. And then there are the people. The people I have to work this through. There's the people, the constituents, and then there's all the lobbyists, and then there's the members of Congress or the legislature that are the people I have to work through, and then there is the press. I have seen issues that you think are going to get passed in the minute somebody gets a really good article in there and shines the light on it, to the woman's point over here about those things that happen in the middle wee hours of the night. If they don't get passed right away and the press gets a hold of it, which they love. Now, the press hasn't been, is anybody here from the press? No press. Okay, no press. All right, the press hasn't been what it used to be, right? It's not as, it's not the same reporting of my, beginning time in advocacy where, we had really investigative reporters. But they would be the ones that really sniff out those midnight deal making. And so, that's, that power of the press is really impactful on how we get things done. So I'm going to give you, in the couple minutes I have remaining, I'll give you maybe one state and one federal issue that I worked on. So a state issue that I worked on, we had a physician still at our place that actually came from Florida but had done his training in Brazil. And again, every state decides for the medical board how their medical licenses are given out. So Florida gave him a medical license. They love, really intelligent, bright people. I'm not saying Ohio doesn't like really intelligent, bright people, so I may have said that wrong. But they liked to import folks that have new technology and gifts that they are going to give that state in terms of medical care. So this doctor was recruited to UH. And Ohio at that point, and this was 2008, had this thing called a visiting medical faculty license. So you could come for 1 year if you were brilliant. You could come for 1 year, and that was it. You give your brilliance to Ohio for 1 year, and they would give you a license. And the reason they wouldn't give you a license is that if you didn't actually do your residency training after medical school in America, Ohio doesn't give you a license. They're like, they only like people that, if you're foreign born, that's great, but you have to do your American training in your residency. So this doctor didn't do that. And, for whatever reason, the people that brought him to UH didn't realize that it was only a year. So they called me up, and his license was going to expire in August, and they called me up in May, and they're like, hey, can we just call the medical board and, talk to them and, get them to let him stay here because he's brilliant. Like, they gave him, a eminent scholar award from the Board of Regents. I mean, this guy is really, really good. So I'm like, let me find out. I call down there, and the medical board, again, nothing against the medical board, but they have rules. And I looked at them, and they're like, we don't care about eminence. If they didn't do their training in America, it's brilliant if they could, if they're a Pulitzer Prize or a, whatever those big awards are, if they're saving humanity. It was just the law in Ohio that you couldn't stay. Like, he could go anywhere else, but he couldn't stay in Ohio. So I'm like, oh. They're like, well, that law, pesky little law. So I'm like, okay, I got to change the law. So anyway, fast forward, the legislature they were all running for election, so nothing was going to happen until after the election in November. So this poor doctor had to go into research, and we had to get a law passed in November of that year in 2008, after the election, and I had to change the law for one doctor. And we have since changed the law. Ohio's board and our legislature have been convinced that eminence and all of these things are really important for Ohio. So now we have doctors that we can do that. But it took somebody bringing an issue, a barrier of policy, and then advocating. And I didn't do anything in the middle of the night. Everybody knew what I was doing. But this doctor is now president of one of our sides of it's the west side of, he's a cardiologist, and he's probably saved somebody's life in this room. And so I just got goosebumps when I said that. And I'm like, I know I had an opportunity to make a difference. So that's something that I do, and that's a state level issue. Now I'll give you a regulatory issue, and then I'll be done. Let's see what time it is. Okay. So my job is to find things that are really UH specific. We also have national associations, right? So many of you worked with your associations in your business area, right? They advocate, they do a great job. So I don't try to do the work of our National Hospital Association or academic associations. But what I do is I come in when it's a UH specific issue that I'm not going to get the American Hospital Association to work on. They aren't going to, Ohio Hospital Association wasn't going to work on this doctor's particular issue. That was something that only UH had as an issue. So we had an issue with our children's hospital. Anybody hear about Rainbow Babies in Children's Hospital? And I realize this is being recorded, but it is my favorite part of UH. I started my job at Rainbow as a child advocate, which is why I can get up here and say, if I don't want to get into a controversy at a dinner party, that I'm a child advocate, because at the core, that is what I am. But, yeah, so it's all right. So Rainbow, there was a regulation passed in the late 90s that had nothing to do with Rainbow. It had to do with hospitals that sat on the campus of another hospital, right? Rainbow Babies is a freestanding children's hospital, sits on the campus of Cleveland Medical Center. Makes a lot of sense, right? Saves us money not to have two, dietary places, right? So it makes a lot of sense to do that. We did that back in the 60s. Okay, so we didn't do it to scam Medicare, but they put this regulation out there in 1997 that basically said if you're a hospital that is paid a certain way, like a children's hospital, and you sit on the campus of an adult hospital, you are forever not able, no matter what, to increase your number of beds. And it's like, okay. Well, Rainbow didn't care about that until recently when we need to expand our number of beds. We have 244 beds. And so our bean counters were like, well, we need more beds. And then the lawyers are like, well, you can't. Sorry, just can't. There's a federal rule that says you will lose your separate status. You will no longer be a children's hospital if you add to 245 beds. Now, does that make sense? That is just the stupidest thing. Now, it makes sense for another class of hospitals that Congress actually came in and were trying to stop from happening. But we literally realized that we were the only children's hospital in the entire country that this was impacting. And so we had to go to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid and convince them that they had to change a regulation for one hospital out of 5,000. Now, that is not easy to do. It took us 2 years, and I won't give you the gory-gories of it, but advocacy, I talk about policy, politics, people, and press. So we invited the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. Her name is Seema Verma. There's lots of controversy between her and Alex Azar, and if you're like in my world, it's like the little soap opera of healthcare. But she's really smart and runs the Medicare program and the Medicaid program for the government. And we brought her to UH 2 years ago. I brought a deputy secretary from HHS, who's like a boss above her, and we toured them and we said, this doesn't make any sense. You've seen Rainbow. Now it's not just the name where I'm writing you a letter, but you've actually been there. You've seen it. You see that we're not scamming the government. These are little babies. They're not on Medicare. They're not trying to steal Medicare dollars like this other class of hospitals that they were trying to stop. So we ended up, after a 2-year slog, got CMS to actually write a regulation. And on January 1 of this year, we have been allowed, so now this is out there, to expand if we need to, our beds. So those are the kinds of things that I feel really good about that I get to do. It's a window into healthcare. I think healthcare advocacy, lobbying, whatever you want to call it, is a very noble profession. Because at the end of the day, why I do it is because I care about the patients that we get to serve and that next patient that gets to have our service because we've done something to either expand coverage or payment stream or a regulation barrier that we've been able to take away. And so with that, I'll turn it back over if you want to do questions.
I'll start off. First of all, a testimony about UH. About a year ago, got a new valve there, and last weekend went on a 13-mile hike with my daughter, so
Wow,
it
congratulations.
works. Works at
Yay.
least so far. But so actually, two little questions, which probably could be hours for an answer. One is, aren't we currently on medical care for all in terms of the fact that if someone comes to a hospital, my understanding is the hospital cannot refuse service. So all those people who said, look, you can't force me to have insurance, I don't need it because I will never get sick or injured. But if they do, the hospital and by extension, everybody else ends up paying for their medical care. So it's very inefficient. So in terms of the various proposals, I assume that there's would probably be a more efficient way to take care of people than just having them show up in the emergency room. And then the other issue, which probably won't have time to get to, but we actually heard last time about trying to understand medical care costs, and you talked about, and there's not really informed consent. So if I buy a car, I can research that. But if someone comes to me in the hospital at 3 a.m. and says, we'd like to take you for a test, you're really not in a position to, okay, where are the benefits, where are the costs, where are the comparative costs for that? And that's one where I'm wondering where the federal government or state government might have to come in and force the medical care system to show what those costs are.
Great. So
In a way that people can
great
understand.
questions, and we could be here for hours, but I'll try to do a succinct job of answering, at least beginning to answer the question. So the first question is regarding access points, and the second is regarding what we call price transparency, which there are legislation going through both the state and federal levels on that. So as it relates to this issue of access points, so yes, there is a federal law that was passed in 1986 when Ronald Reagan was president, called the Emergency Medical Treatment Stabilization and Labor Act. And why the labor? Because press in California, people were driving from Mexico over the border to have babies, and the folks in California realized that if they would send them back to Mexico, they wouldn't become U.S. citizens, and they wouldn't have an uninsured patient. So prior to 1986, there was no law that limited a hospital to be able to transfer a pregnant lady in labor back to another hospital or basically not take care of them. And in one particular case, a woman died en route back to Mexico, and this became part of the public domain. So again, the press bringing this up. Congress very quickly passed a law that said it doesn't matter whether you're covered or not covered, whether you're American or not American, but if you are in active labor at a hospital emergency department, even if they don't have OB in that hospital, they are not allowed to transfer that patient in active labor. So that was number one part of the bill. The number two part of the bill is that any hospital that gets a patient that is an emergency patient, so they need to be screened, and then if they are screened as having an emergency condition, hospitals are required to treat them. They are not allowed to dump them. They're not allowed to transfer. They can transfer under certain conditions to another hospital, not if you're in active labor, but they are required to treat. And that is where the front door for healthcare access, healthcare for all in America. Now, that's a worse place to have access, because in order to get that criteria of having an emergency condition that needs to be treated or you die, that means you have to have ignored everything that you've had. You have to have cancer at some point where you're imminently going to die. You have to have heart disease where you're imminently going to die. You have to have some sort of something that, isn't just to stabilize. And you could stabilize somebody and then discharge them without giving them full foreign treatment. So it's the most expensive way to get health care. And unfortunately, before the Affordable Care Act, which opened up access to about another 15 million people in America on Medicaid and another 11 million through the exchanges, there was really no front door for health care if you had no insurance. Again, we talk about Medicaid, and prior to the Affordable Care Act, if you were a healthy man or a healthy woman that didn't have children at home, and you were 0 to whatever poverty, the only place you could get health care, you were not categorically eligible for Medicaid. So now they have made people regardless of whether they're single, healthy or not healthy, at 138% of poverty, at least in Ohio, you have access. So yes, that law still exists, and yes, people still come to the emergency department and get treatment. And we give away, like at UH, about $50 million in charity care a year, and it is the most inefficient dollar we ever spend. Now, we will spend it because we're required to and because it's part of our mission, but it's the most expensive dollar that we're ever going to spend. If we can get them in health insurance or take care of them prior to this sort of end stage, emergency, it's so much better. So yes, unfortunately, because of the way our country has been, sort of founded and, that damned individualism and federalism and all of that, we do not have a program like other countries in the EU. It's just not our polity. It's not what we believe. We come in when the market failure and we decide who the deserving poor is. And the most deserving poor at that moment of emergency are only people that come to the emergency room. So that is unfortunately, and then I'll answer your other question on price transparency.
Heidi, will you speak to the very observable, build out of the hospital system in Northeast Ohio between you and the clinic particularly? It just seems like in the last 20 years it's spread out. Now for us who get the service in town here with a pacemaker rather than going downtown where I just was anyway, okay. Just tell me, what's the tension between the clinic and UH?
Okay, let me answer price transparency, and then I'll get to the issue of sort of our health delivery system and getting closer to patients. So price transparency, which was the second part of your question, again, this is one that Republicans and Democrats sort of all agree about. And who's fighting it out is the insurance company and the hospitals. So there's laws at the federal level, there are laws pending at the state level that are attempting to fix this. And it is the largest conundrum for anybody, even myself as a consumer. We have a Bill of Rights at university hospitals that every patient should have access to what is their price. And we are really working very hard to be able to give patients that advance notice for what they can expect to pay. The problem is that the hospital systems and the insurance systems don't work all that well in talking to one another. So, if you have, let's say, Aetna or United or whatever, they may have 100 different plans. And I have a card that my plan is very unique to my employer, and what my copay, my coinsurance, how much I've spent so far this year is very difficult for the hospital to know what you've paid. So for us to say what it's going to cost in total, we can tell you. But what it's going to cost you out of pocket, and that's really the question, is how much am I going to pay? How much am I going to be responsible for? And that's where Congress is hoping to step in and to be able to regulate that conversation between the insurance company and the hospitals. I mean, if we can find out what's in our bank account electronically, and we can go to a Fifth Third, even though we might be a Key Bank member, and find that out, we should be able to find that out for how much I'm going to pay out of pocket and what I have left on my deductible. I do believe that that's something that's going to get fixed over the next 2 years because it's in the press. People want it. The politics of it are, there's not this visceral Republican-Democrat division, and it's in the detail of getting it fixed. But I do believe it will be something that is fixed. And then, Bill, to your question about did that answer your question at least this much? Okay, all right. So, Bill, to your question of the delivery system. So we realized that we built these big hospitals, and the most expensive place to go in healthcare are these big hospitals. So population health and really going to the communities where people live is really where the next sort of frontier of healthcare is, because we want to keep people well at home rather than sick in a hospital. And so Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance are all incentivizing healthcare systems to be much better at not getting you for that first admission. So taking care of your pacemaker or whatever you can do with your adjustment out in the community. Making sure that you are eating a low-fat, low-salt diet so that you don't have hypertension and you don't, end up having arrhythmias. And we are being incentivized by the insurance companies to basically do that rather than a fee for service. Every time you come in, we get paid, versus if we keep you home and healthy and you don't readmit back to our hospital, we actually have a benefit to our payment system. We have an incentive not to have you come back. So we try to do everything we can within, at UH, for example. If you're discharged from the hospital, we work really hard within the first 7 days to get you in to see a physician. We have a whole plan that we're developing. So it's evolving, and the clinic and UH are very much the same way. I don't think you're going to see the competition as much with these big, white shiny buildings, as much as what we're providing out in the community and where the physicians and the clinicians are that are taking care of you. So hopefully that answers a little bit. I saw another question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Heidi, thank you for coming. I wanted to return to your remarks about surprise billing.
Sure.
I don't know what UH's position is with regard to independent contractors in emergency medicine. I do know I've been to a HUJA in the emergency room, and Medicare covered the visit. But I was just curious. You never said what UH's position is
Sure.
with regard to surprise billing. So what is it?
So I think we're in a very good position. Number one is our academic medical center down at Cleveland Medical Center, Rainbow. All of our physicians are employed. So whoever has the same contracts as the hospital, the physicians in hospital. So you're not going to, for the most part, get a surprise bill if you come to those. So HUJA, there's a mixture between our employed physicians and independents, as you say. Now, one of the things our legal team, I think, has really worked really hard, and I'll ask Bill if he wants to comment on this, but we work really hard to make sure that when we contract with a private group, and most of the surprise bills come from the anesthesiologist, the people you never choose, right? The emergency doctor that you never choose, a pathologist that you never choose, a radiologist. These are people that are sort of in the back rooms that sort of either come into the room, and descend on you. You pick your cardiologist, you pick your gastroenterologist, right? You know all those people up front. But when you're in a hospital, these hospital-based physicians are often people you may never even meet. You may never meet the radiologist that reads your scan, or the pathologist that does your, slice of your cancer specimen. So we work really hard when we contract with those doctors to make sure that they are also contracted with insurance, the same insurances that we have. And that's something that we're actually working on throughout our entire system, because the worst thing we know from a customer service perspective, the last thing we want is a patient getting a surprise bill. Because while they may not say UH on the top of it, may say, gastroenterology X company, right? We know that it's going to come back to UH, and we're going to have to resolve it for you. So I don't think we do it as often. Bill, do you have a comment about that? 'Cause
Yeah.
you're right on the front ground.
Yeah, I think like Heidi said, that the vast majority of the physicians that we use are known to us, whether they're employed or they're independent, and we know what contracts they have, and we work with them pretty closely. The struggle we get into sometimes is the hard to fill subspecialties. The group that you contract with, they needed a few shifts filled because 2 physicians have moved away, and they call in a locums, and that locums has 95% of those contracts in Northeast Ohio covered, but it's the one obscure Aetna contract that's only for ex-railroad employees who lived in Illinois between these years, and all of a sudden it's not there. It's not covered. And so whenever that happens, we work directly with the physician group to say, hey, how can we have a beneficial resolution to this? for this patient who did receive a surprise bill. But as Heidi, I think just at Portage, the number of insurance companies, the last one I saw, it's about 723 insurance companies, and they can change their rules quarterly. And so it's a battle.
Heidi, can I address an issue as well?
Please.
And that is the big elephant in the room. The insurance company that restricts access will throw up a health system completely out, or, from my perspective, managing physicians for 30 years, throw a physician group out, elect to just not include them within their coverage. And it wasn't that the physicians didn't want to be on plan. Humana, United Healthcare, just elected to throw them out and wouldn't allow readmission despite whatever they wanted to do. Some of the rationales for that are quite, well, let's just say, you don't know why.
Right.
You don't know why. And the processes for readmission, again, are very unknown and not really published. I manage the ICU doctors at Christ Hospital in Cincinnati, probably the best private hospital, and Humana threw our ICU doctors out of the network because they considered them to be too expensive as pulmonologists. It was a closed ICU. Often you're unconscious when you arrived at a Humana hospital, only to find that the entire stay is not covered. We could appeal it on behalf of our patients, and we're successful in doing so. But the reality was we were out for more than 18 months, and it took some very political actions, quite frankly, to bring us back in. And that is not an unusual story.
Well, the one thing I will just say, this shows exactly this conundrum that we have in the United States of wanting healthcare to be a business and private, economics and, the economy to work as businesses do with competition and whatnot versus government regulation of coming in and stopping that activity. And, the EU might have a very different way of handling that, but in the United States, we leave it to the free market unless enough people come up and deal with it. So yeah, that's a issue that we're going to deal with until, or if we ever have socialized medicine in the United States. Do you want me to ask one more? Or?
No, I think we're
one thing quick. My friends in the EU are not real happy with our system either.
That's true. That's true. There's no perfect system, right? If you need health care and you don't get it or it costs too much, it doesn't work. And that's the end of the day.
Heidi, there may be some folks that want to ask you questions. Can you stay around for a few minutes after?
Sure
That's
will.
wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
A lot of great perspective there. If I can paraphrase George Bernard Shaw, there are those who look at things the way they are and ask why, and there are folks like Heidi who dream of things that should be and say, let's change the law. That's pretty cool. Most of us don't think of things that way, but it sounds like you've been very successful at doing that and making some good change in the world. So, okay, let's go on to Rotabuck here. We have $13 today. If I could ask Heidi to pick a ticket. All right, super. The last four digits are 6116. All right. Come on up here, Pat. $13 and going for a jackpot of $124. Okay. There is a black one in there. See it?
All right, there is.
All right. Go for it. Oh, I'm sorry. Not this week. Okay. Hey, I want to thank John Adams and the Speakers Committee for doing a great job with health and wellness this month. I like to think that probably my idea of health and wellness is that little refrigerator tag that I used to see that says, it has a little picture of a cat and a pizza on it and says, yeah, I'm into fitness this whole pizza in my mouth. But health is like money. We never have a true idea of its value until we lose it. So let's all take some good messages from what we've learned this month and take good care of ourselves. And let's all go out there and show the world why we are proud to be Rotarians. I think that covers it. I declare this meeting adjourned.